Thank you. And we do have one more program left up here, and that is Jim Yanke, and he's there sitting with Wendy. Hi, Wendy. Jim, do you want to just go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about your presentation, and then present your presentation?
Hi, yeah, this is my wife, Wendy.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is a 15-minute program about just, I guess, how I became interested in trains. So it's a lot of it's about, starts off with my dad, who worked for the Chicago Northwestern, and then it just kind of goes into a chronological documentary, if you will, of just some train shots I've taken over the years and some of the places I've been, and then just ends with some drone shots. So just a potpourri of stuff. And yeah, so, and this is all, it's a prepared video. So I have all the narration in there. So I'll just play the video. I'll just mute myself and I'll play the video. Enjoy. My name is Jim Yanke. Today's story starts with my dad, the original Jim Yanke. He started on the Chicago and Northwestern in 1960 as a switchman and eventually worked as a brakeman and conductor. He worked on scoots between Kenosha and Chicago, as well as freights on the Chicago Northwestern's Wisconsin division. He retired in 2002, 7 years after the Northwestern had been merged into the Union Pacific. My dad married Ellen, my mom, in 1962. They had a room in the sleeper observation car on the Illinois Central's Panama Limited from Chicago to New Orleans for their honeymoon. This was only the first of many railroad adventures for her. In the early 1970s, we lived on the north side of Milwaukee. I often saw the Soo Line's Milwaukee turn from my bedroom window as the train ran on Milwaukee road trackage between Rugby Junction and Milwaukee. This is a shot of a westbound that my dad took at the end of our street near 61st Street and Green Tree Road. I was the luckiest kid growing up. My dad built this big model railroad in the basement that I could play with whenever I wanted to. I usually got a new locomotive for Christmas every year. My two sisters also have had a lot of experiences around trains during their lives. In 1974, when I was 6 years old, I went to work with my dad for the first time. It was a 15-hour day from the time he woke me up at 4 a.m. to the time we got back home. During the hour-and-a-half trip to Chicago, I sat in a seat in the upper level while he did his job. After we got to Chicago, we walked around downtown, had some lunch, and then we took a nap in this big, dark room in one of the upper floors of the depot. This room was filled with old metal bunk beds and snoring railroaders. After a power nap, it was time to head back north to Kenosha on the club run, which was also known as the Banker's Special. At that time, the club run had 3 former parlor cars that were converted into club lounge cars and were leased by wealthy businessmen for their private commute. As we headed back north and the train became less crowded, my dad asked me if I wanted to see the engine. When he opened the dirty door of the locomotive leading into the engine room, I remember feeling pretty terrified. The sound of the engine suddenly became deafening. I felt a blast of hot, oily wind on my face. I held his hand as we walked next to the giant pine movers towards the cab. The cab ride was the thrill of a lifetime. In 1983, I lived in Washington County and started photographing trains in the area with my dad's camera. Rugby Junction was one of my favorite hangouts. I shot the Chicago Northwestern every now and then, especially when my dad was working on the airline between Butler and Fond du Lac. He wrote a book about the airline after he retired. In 1986, I started college at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and majored in Russian. I caught a few Northwestern trains, but studying and partying took priority over biking off campus to catch those trains. I was able to see a lot of Wisconsin and Calumet trains as the tracks were only a short walk from the dorm I lived in. I studied Russian for a semester in the Soviet Union in Moscow in 1990. I returned to Moscow in 1992, which was right after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and worked as a contractor for the State Department. I initially drove diplomats and eventually got the position as driver and personal assistant to the U.S. ambassador to Russia. My parents visited me in 1994. We took the Red Arrow from Moscow to St. Petersburg and back. In 1995, I moved to New York City and eventually worked at 13 WNET, New York's PBS station. The building was located at 33rd Street and 10th Avenue and happened to be built over the tracks west of Penn Station. I had views to the east toward Penn Station and to the west overlooking the Long Island courtyards and the old New York Central High Line. The High Line was a short elevated rail line built in the early 1930s, which ran in and around factories and was used until the early 1980s. Before the High Line was transformed into today's beautiful elevated public park in 2009, it was reclaimed by nature. We snuck up there one day and managed to get through this barrier. After getting some cool shots, we descended into what we thought was a regular parking lot. Well, the lot happened to belong to the Drug Enforcement Agency, and we were detained and questioned for a few hours. The agents who questioned us didn't really believe that we were taking pictures of the old railroad right-of-way and clearly didn't show my enthusiasm for railroad history. I lived in New York for about 10 years and managed to shoot a few trains that were accessible by public transportation. In 2002, my dad and I went to China. We started out in Beijing and were able to shoot a lot of trains without any problems. We had a guide and a driver who brought us to Chengde, which was a 4-hour drive north of Beijing. This is where some of China's last operating steam engines were located. My dad and I were concerned as our driver and guide walked us through this tunnel, which was located on an active main line. Fortunately, no steam engines passed through the tunnel while we were in it. In 2005, I moved to central Pennsylvania to attend a university where I studied to become a physician assistant. I was in one of the best rail fanning areas in the country, but had 40 hours of class per week during my first year, and I really needed to study during most of my free time. I found this beautiful place to study in nearby Cassandra, but it turned out to be too distracting for me. During my second year of PA school, I moved to several locations around the Appalachian Valley every 5 weeks in order to complete various clinical rotations. In 2007, I moved back to Wisconsin and started working as a physician assistant. I met my wife Wendy in 2012. She's developed somewhat of an appreciation for trains. I bought a drone in 2018. This renewed my interest in rail fanning and inspired me to shoot videos and record sound. My parents lived their last years in Jackson, right next to the airline. We sure had a lot of fun railroad adventures together.
Thanks a lot for watching.
And Jim Yanke, everybody, give it up for Jim.
Thank you.
Very nice, Jim. Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was fun to to dig through all the slides and and put everything together. I haven't looked through slides in a long time, so it was just fun putting it together and as well as sharing it. So honored to be here. So yeah.
Thank you. And anybody have anything else for Jim? We had 3 wonderful programs tonight.
Just a short question. Did you ride any trains in China?
Oh yeah. Good question. We took an overnight train to Xi'an, which is to the south.
Okay.
And back. Yeah. And so on the way down, we had our own room. And then on the way back, we shared a room with 2 other guys. It was a fun time.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Yeah. So like I say, 3 wonderful programs tonight. So let's tip our hat in appreciation to Jerry Pfeiffer, Jerry Krug, and Jim Yanke. Thank you, gentlemen. So our next meeting is March 3rd, featuring the photography of Richard Koenig from the 1970s. That will be a Zoom meeting. He will be presenting it remotely, but we will have the church open for anybody who wants to see it on the big screen in Fox Point at our regular meeting place in the church basement. So that's 3rd of March. We'll do another one of these online slideshows third Tuesday in April. And if you're interested in presenting a 15-minute program, please be in touch with me. My name is Mike Uhas, and my email address is membership@nrhswis.org. So with that, we're going to shut the thing down, and thank you all for attending. Good night.